Good afternoon. We're here shooting our first podcast for VSGA, and we're here at Hands and Heart Farm in Charlotte with Catherine Knox. And welcome to our podcast, and thanks for being part of our first podcast and having us on your farm. It's lovely.
Thank you, Melissa.
So, Catherine, I think one of the things that's interesting to me, one of the goals about the podcast is to help people who might be interested in doing this and have them understand how you can have two kinds of life. You can be farming sheep, but you can also be a school teacher in your case. And so I guess what I'm wondering with you, were you first a school teacher or a school teacher and a farmer, or how did that come about?
Well, I've always had an interest in animals, and we were living in Richmond with very little land. So the farming piece of it I knew would come, but it wasn't going to happen when we were living in Richmond. So the children came first. And as the children grew, then the school that we were sending them to was the Lake Champlain Waldorf School. Mm-hmm. And did not want to make that commute on a daily basis, so we started looking for land or a home closer to the Waldorf School in Shelburne. So we found the land we live on here, and so when we moved in, it was probably within the first year chickens came, and then we knew that there would be other animals, but we didn't know what animals were going to come, and I developed an interest in sheep through going to the county fairs. Mm-hmm. And we used to walk around the sheep barn, and really just there were so many things about sheep that I really admired, but I didn't know enough about the individual breeds. So I spent some time researching that, and then the sheep started coming. My interest was in Border Leicesters and Romneys. My first 3 sheep, I had 2 Border Leicester Weather bottle-fed lambs and 1 Romney ewe that was also bottle-fed. So the idea was that I could have at least 1 ewe that could be bred and experience lambing when she was of age, and then go from there. I've never deviated from the Border Leicesters and Romneys. So both of them are considered dual-purpose breeds. So they have gorgeous wool, but they can also be, their meat is also very good. Mm-hmm. And the meat of a Border Leicester or a Romney is a mild meat. And if you don't want a gamey tasting animal, that was one of the reasons why we chose these 2 breeds. So, occasionally we have to send sheep off to a market. Mm-hmm. And people like the meat from the Border Leicester, and they like the meat for the Romney. But when I first got them, that was in my mind that I needed to keep that in mind. But it wasn't my purpose for getting those 2 breeds. Like, I wasn't thinking about the meat. I was mostly thinking about the wool. I thought of it as eventually a business for the farm. Mostly at first it started out with just wool to have some blankets made and to have some yarn made and, needle felting. And I didn't realize as many uses as there are for wool at the time when we started with so few sheep. Yeah. And then as more sheep came, there was more of a need to do more with it because I had so much wool. And I love it. I love the wool. So I've been doing this about 15 years. We are at about 56 sheep right now. Okay. And 18 of those are lambs. Mm-hmm. I've also got some older girls that, may be leaving us soon. 15 years. I've had Romneys live to be 15 years. Wow. And that's about the limit. And Border Leicesters, I notice around 12, they start getting pretty fragile. Okay. That is my experience. Right. Somebody else would have a different experience. But I'm feeling like, 14, 15 on the Romneys are really delicate. Mm-hmm. And then, 12 10 to 12 years old on the Border Leicesters, they start losing weight.
Yeah.
They're harder for them to keep condition. Their wool quality is decreasing. And those are the ones that I've had for so many years, and it's hard to make decisions on them.
Yeah.
So I wait. Again, I let them, I just kind of, I pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
And if they are not living a good quality life, then I need to make some decisions to change that. And I know people who are really good about culling and just removing sheep that are old this way. I have a hard time with that, but it does need to happen.
Yeah.
In order to keep a herd healthy, you've got to let go of the ones that are taking a lot of the attention away from the others.
Yeah. Now, that said, in your experience, I mean, given that you keep basically two breeds of sheep, which are more desirable for wool and which are more desirable for meat, do you feel? And even if they're not ones you keep, what would you say would be the most desirable breeds for each of those things?
So I can't say with the meat if one is desirable more than another. What I can say is that a Border Leicester grows faster than a Romney. So at a young age, a Border Leicester would be more desirable than a Romney if it's going for meat. For wool, I like the combination of the two. When I'm having yarn made, there's a very distinct difference between having just Border Leicester yarn as opposed to having Border Leicester Romney yarn. And it took me many years to figure that out, and it was actually the mistake of a mill helped me to figure it out. They were supposed to process a lot of my wool together. They made a mistake and processed only some Border Leicester and sent it to me. And there was a distinct difference between the Border Leicester yarn that was made and the Border Leicester and Romney yarn that was made in combination.
Better, worse, or?
They were different. There was more of a loft and a softness to that had the Romney in it. The straight Border Leicester, they're both really durable yarns, which are really, I mean, when we talk about merino and a lot of these other yarns that people want. Those all are lovely, soft yarns, but you also want something that's durable, and it's gonna stand up to time, and it's not gonna pill. And Border Leicester and Romney, the combination of the two do that. And even just a Romney and just a Border Leicester, they both are beautiful yarns, but I like the combination of the two.
And they are on the larger side of the sheep family, both of those breeds, aren't they?
They are. They're considered a medium breed, but there's some stuff that's happening to make them a little bit larger. When both of my children showed sheep, and we were a part of the show world for a time, and I still help in some of the shows that take place, and it's amazing to me how some of these breeds are getting so much larger.
And what do you attribute that to?
I'm not quite sure.
Okay. Is it a breeding thing, a feeding thing, feeding?
It's possibly a combination of the two. People who are putting animals in for show are feeding a lot, and they're feeding high quality feed. And there's also a market they can also turn around and sell those animals for a large amount of money because they put a lot into them. They can get a lot out of them.
Are the larger breed of sheep easier to breed? Do they are they easier lambing than the smaller breeds of sheep?
I don't think so.
No.
Larger sheep can also have larger lambs.
Yeah.
And depending on what you feed them, I know when it's lambing time, I'm very careful about what I'm feeding and how I'm feeding. I want to be able to have the ewes, the females, getting the nourishment that they need, but I also don't want them eating so much that they're going to have a hard time lambing, and that end up with 15, 18-pound lambs.
So you're careful with that.
I try to be.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so what is your basic, I know so many people right around the table, everyone has a different way of a different type of husbandry. So how do you care for your sheep, and what would you say are some of the most important things that someone who's interested in beginning this or getting involved in it, what are some things that you feel are most important in raising healthy animals?
This idea of rotational grazing, I think, is very important. I think having fecals done, because parasites are such an issue for sheep, I think having fecals done, and there are some, you don't have to, everything does not have to be expensive when you're raising sheep. And one of the things that I have learned through the years is I've learned how to take care of my sheep on my own. And you have to, because...
You mean as opposed to have the vet come out?
A vet come with everything that happens or goes a little awry. To have a vet becomes unaffordable.
Right.
So you learn to pay attention, and you read books, you talk to other shepherds, people who have done this before. I had wonderful mentors that if I had a question and a sheep was acting differently, that I would get in touch with somebody and that had been doing this a long time. So rotational grazing, paying attention. There are things that you can do. The fecals, sending them off there are labs around the country that you can find, that you can send samples to, that don't cost a great deal. And communication is such these days that you can get an email back, or if people will call you. You can have a rush put on something if you're really concerned. So
do you just graze in the summer? Do you stick to straight grazing, or do you supplement with grain and corn or anything like that?
I give grain to lambs only.
Okay.
And I think that lambs need that for proper growth. I do know people that don't feed any grain, and they have to be very good and diligent about that rotational grazing piece and making sure those sheep are having good pasture, and they're having it a lot, and they're having it change quickly. So if you've got the land to do it, that's a wonderful way to do it, and you don't have to grain. I find that for my lambs, they grow better in the beginning if I'm giving them grain. So I may grain them anytime between 3 and 6 months, and depending, I may grain them up to 9 months.
Okay.
And then they're strictly on pasture.
And how about, for example, minerals? And, I know someone when I began said, good pasture, clean water.
Yeah.
Good
pasture, clean water, and minerals. They need that.
Right.
And I make my own mineral. I use a combination of fish meal, zinc, salt, something I get from Premier. That's it's a mineral supplement, and kelp is another thing that I use. And I mix. I mix it. And they love it. And if that dish is empty, as soon as I fill it, they are going and eating it. And that tells me my pasture's something's not giving them everything they need, and they're getting something from that mineral. And I have to say, the mineral I notice also, here's another thing, is apple cider vinegar, just a little glug in the water. They say it's good for parasites, but I think it's good for wool quality. I notice that the fiber on my sheep shines. I think it's a combination of my mineral and the apple cider vinegar. It's also just, the stock I have, the breeding stock that I have, I think contributes to that.
Do you use salt blocks in the summer only, or do you add salt blocks, or do you think they just get the salt they need from your minerals?
I think they get the salt they need from their minerals, and it was recommended to me early on not to use salt blocks because it's not good for their teeth. They only have the one row of teeth, and you want to keep them as long as you can. So if you're giving them a salt block and that's what they're chewing, they're wearing down those teeth faster than you want them to. There are some feed stores around that sell some excellent mineral for sheep, but you have to tell them it's for sheep,
Right.
so that you don't get something with copper in it.
Right. Right. So, as far as expenses on the farm, what you would consider the biggest medical expenses on the farm? I mean, do you need to have a vet on site sometimes for your births, or what kind of thing would you need to have a vet on the farm for? What would be the most common things?
Well, if I can't figure it out myself, I mean, I can treat my animals with most anything. But if I can't figure it out and I've exhausted everything that I know how to do, and I've talked to other shepherds, and, a lot of it is intuition. And it's like something is off here, and I need to call the vet. Yeah. And, my vet comes probably at least once a year. And sometimes twice. And during lambing time, if I've had a major issue at lambing time, I may have to call the vet out for... I don't think I've ever had to have the vet come for an emergency, but I have had emergency situations during lambing time, and that have not resolved themselves, where a couple weeks later I've had the vet come in and catch something that I've missed. And I like having that relationship. I have a good relationship with a vet. And I think it's hard to find a vet who is very knowledgeable about sheep.
Yeah, I agree.
I've found a wonderful one now, but I've had some terrible experiences with vets that don't have experience with sheep. And they just need to admit that. If they don't feel like they know enough, then I think it's up to us to find the right person who knows about sheep and to shop around.
Right. I think one of the things that's coming across, which I really like, is that you listen to your intuition.
That is true. And one of my reasons for halter training all of my lambs, we had 18 lambs this spring, and I've had my hand on every single one of them, and I'm putting a halter on them. I'm looking at them every day. So I start this July 1st. This year I started June 30th. June 30th, every morning, it's a routine. I get up, I put the grain in their stall, they come in, I put a halter on them, I tie them, and it's a process. That first time that halter goes on them, they are wild. And they're flailing and they're throwing themselves on the ground. And I'm learning something about their personality. Where are we? We're on the 18th, today the 18th? 17th of July. So every day they're all now, I put the halter on them and they're walking around with me. They'll go wherever that, they're walking right next to me when they're walking, which is what I want. And then I'm putting my hands all over them. I'm looking at their hooves, I'm looking at their mouths, I'm looking at their body, I'm condition scoring them, seeing how they're growing, I'm weighing them. And it really is the first part of getting to know my sheep. And so when people are buying breeding stock from me or they're buying lambs, I've got a couple of families that are buying lambs from me, and I know how to choose of my flock of lambs which ones should go to which people. And that comes from really getting to know them. For me, there's no point in having the animals if I'm not going to spend time with them and just get to know them. And sheep are flighty. They're nervous. They're prey animals.
Right.
So they need to feel as though they can trust who's ever taking care of them. And so I think I just take pride in that, of wanting to know them and have a relationship with them, so they're not going to fly away every time they see me coming.
Right. And so is that what gives you the most pleasure? That's the other piece that comes across to me, is that the pleasure is the work of doing the things you do, the products, the meat, the wool, the things you make from them. But it strikes me that you just really enjoy keeping sheep.
I do.
Now, do you keep other things on the farm now? What other animals do you have on your farm?
We have chickens and we have ducks and we have lots of cats that are mostly outdoors.
Mm-hmm.
We keep the barn cats, and they're very social with certain members of the family. I move too fast, so they don't particularly like me. And we have now our little guard Chihuahua and our border collie that just passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But you enjoy all of that.
I do, and I'm a worker.
Mm-hmm.
I've
because
always...
you have an outside job.
Well, I have an outside job, and I'm a person that doesn't sit a lot, and I like to be busy. I grew up on a small farm where we raised we had horses, mostly boarding other people's horses, and I just work is fun for me. I like going out to the barn and sweeping and
Right.
and keeping it clean, and I think that's another thing about farming and farms. I like having a clean farm. Everything has its place. I drive down that driveway when I'm up at the top of the hill and I do a quick scan. You say, oh, that's got to go. The pallet that's left out in the middle of the lawn. Or, I think it's just all part of keeping a healthy flock of sheep.
And there's purpose in that.
Yeah.
Right? There's purpose in that.
Yeah. And because I'm an educator and I'm talking with people a lot, and I'm in a school, and and I'm dressed professionally, I like coming home and getting my farm clothes on and getting outside, and it I think keeps me healthy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And tell me this, one of the things that Kelly talked about was, and I agree, and I'm sure Morgan does too, is she talked about you being a really supportive part of her shepherding community, and how important is that to someone starting out, having resources and kind resources, because it can be scary.
Yes. I think it's really essential. And I think that other people, I said we were part of the show world there for a time. And I got a sheep from Oregon once, and the woman who sold her to me, she became a mentor to me. I've met people when you go to these sheep and wool festivals. I think people who raise sheep are lovely human beings and are often available to help. If you have a question, I know that when I'm still in touch with a lot of people who've bought sheep from me over the years, and I like people knowing that if they have a question, they can call me, and if I don't have the answer, I will help them to find the answer. I just think that the community is, and I think it's easy to find.
Now, another interesting piece of your farm is that you're completely off-grid, correct?
Yes.
And how does that easy, and how is that difficult for you, raising sheep and other animals?
It really feels like a very normal home. I've just lived this way we built our house in 2003, and when we lived in Richmond, we decided that when we found this land and knew that we wanted to put the house back in this corner, we decided that we wanted to find out if we could live off-grid. So there used to be a solar tour that happened the first weekend in October every year, and you could go to various homes that lived either with solar, lived with wind, lived with both, maybe just solar hot water. So people opened up their homes to educate others, and so we did that, and we decided to change our light bulbs, and we went with different light bulbs, low, what they even call them back then. Anyway, low energy, the light was good, and we found that we could cut our consumption in half just by being conscious of turning lights off when we left rooms, not running things when they weren't, not needing to have everything plugged in at a time that was phantom loads, and we cut our energy consumption in half, and then decided we wanted to use solar, and we felt that in Vermont, to be off grid, you really needed solar and wind. So it's not prevented us from doing anything differently. There was a time a few years ago when we needed to either upgrade our system. So here we built in 2003. It's now 2022. So about 4 years ago, we needed to make a choice whether if we were going to stay off grid, we needed to upgrade our system, or we needed to go on grid. And my husband could have gone either way. I was really convinced I wanted to stay off grid. So we looked into what it would take, and then we made the decision to just upgrade our system. So now my husband, one of the things that was hard for him is if we were away on a vacation, or if we went away, and yes, you can go on vacation when you have a sheep farm. You find people who can help out. And so he now, if we go on vacation, he can do everything from his phone. And that was one of the pieces of upgrading our system, was that remotely he could turn our backup generator on. If we didn't see the sun or the wind for 4 days or 5 days, he could turn on the backup generator from a remote location and have it run for 2 hours or something, or forever how long you wanted to have it run, and then to shut it off again. It hasn't limited what we do here. We're just very conscious of the kinds of things that we bring in that use energy. For example, we don't use hot water heaters in the wintertime, but that gets me to the barn more. I do haul water from the house, warm water for the pregnant ewes in the wintertime. The barn has a hydrant, so we have water there all year round. It's cold. Pregnant ewes, you want them to drink more water, so they will tend to drink more if it's warm. So I do haul buckets in the wintertime in the morning out to the barn. So that is something that does limit us. For the chickens, rubber, you learn how to do things differently. Rubber dishes that you can turn over and stomp. Plastic breaks, so you use rubber. And you find the kinds of dishes and the various things that you can use in the wintertime that can freeze and that you can replenish easily. So it gets me to the barn twice a day, in the wintertime.
Saves you money on the gym membership.
There you go.
Right. So I guess what I wanted to, going into that, is you talked about being able to leave the farm, and one of the things that I have down here is finding that work-life balance. I mean, it seems like you love both of the things that you do.
I do.
And so how do you balance that? Because they're both things that demand a tremendous amount from you. You probably have summers off. That's helpful. But still, how do you find that balance? And included in that, what do you do when your family wants to take a vacation, or when your kids graduates from school somewhere or something? How do you do that?
Planning and really good notes. So my job, when my first child was born, I went half-time. So I'm a reading specialist in a public school. And I decided to go half-time, so that I wouldn't be able, I couldn't raise for me, I didn't want to raise my children having a full-time job, because I would have been a wild woman. So I went half-time when my first child was born. So then when the animals started coming, I've just always been half-time. So I managed that in such a way that it's part of self-care. I think it's really hard. Sometimes I'm really stretched. Lambing time, I'm really stretched. And I try and, when I'm doing my professional job in school, I try to give them my 100%. When I'm here on the farm, I'm giving my animals and my family my 100%. I try not to bring work home, and I try not to bring my farm life to school. Mm-hmm. And lambing time is the one time of year that my schedule might get a little topsy-turvy, mm-hmm. and I'm a little more mm-hmm. tired than usual.
And do you have a backup, like a farm sitter or something if you need to be away from the farm?
So we do have friends who will come and either stay or will come a number of times throughout the day and and manage things. And one of my children did just graduate from college, and so we all were gone, and we did have friends coming over and maintaining, and it's a lot.
It is. It's a lot of notes.
It's a lot of notes. And I'll tell you, the best way to write these notes for people is that when I go to do my chores, I have my phone, mm-hmm. and I talk into Siri, and then I just take that and I modify it as, as later on I'll just take those notes and modify it in such a way that it's easy for somebody to follow those directions.
I wanted to ask a little bit, you mentioned that your border collie did not manage your flock, but how do you manage your flock? Because I think sometimes I have been surprised, being someone who uses dogs to manage the flock. I always wonder how people move 56 sheep without dogs, because they're such an inherent part of doing it for us. So I'm wondering, how do you move them field to field, or how do you manage your flock that way?
I've always admired people who were able to use dogs. I've never had a working dog that I could count on mm-hmm. to move the sheep. Mm-hmm. So I have learned ways to be able to do it without them. And because my lambs start with grain, the sheep never forget. They don't forget the sound of grain in a yogurt container. And if I'm out there, if the sheep are out there and I'm in the barn and I want everybody to come in because I need to check eyelids, or it's time to maybe give some worming medicine, or I need to clip hooves, I'm in the barn. I'll, may have to walk partially out to the pasture, and I'll shake that yogurt container with grain, and they all will come running. And I give them a taste of grain every once in a while, just so they remember what it tastes like, and they will do most anything for that grain. Yeah. For me.
Right. I do that. I keep the grain use just for that, so that it's it's a big treat.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think what I wanted to know now is about what you offer as a product from the farm, what you have made from all of your animals. You may sell eggs, and what do you do as a products from your farm?
So I have yarn from the sheep. And the yarn, I do a couple of festivals each year where I take the yarn with me. And there are some yarn stores that carry my yarn. Must Love Yarn, Norwich Knits carries my yarn. There's a store in Bristol that's Hermit Thrush is hoping to start carrying some of my yarn. I do the festivals. I don't quite know how it happens. People contact me from around the country and want my yarn, mm-hmm. and they've heard about it from somebody else. Mm-hmm. There is some over in the Ropey Museum right now. They reached out to me and asked me if I would put some there. I do have I have pelts, sheep pelts, mm-hmm. for the ones that do have to go off to the market. I do the curing myself, and I send my skins off to have somebody else tan them. I have a lot of roving. I have stuffing that people use to make, because I was a Waldorf school parent, the stuffing from wool stuffing used to stuff dolls or various things. I do spin, not as much as, because I don't sit enough to do it enough. I knit. I do make some items now and then. I have a friend who's been knitting socks with my yarn. I have some nylon added to my fingering and some of my sport weight, because I like a thicker sock. So I have some sport weight with some nylon in it, and a friend of mine uses a cranky that she makes me some beautiful socks with that that I sell. There's a lot. I try and have something for everybody. I make little cat toys. I
And
make dryer balls.
Do you have a shop, or do people just...
I have a little studio over here.
Mm-hmm.
That was actually an Amish home that was brought here in two pieces. Wow. And put back together. I had a friend do some construction on it, raise the ceiling inside, and it's a sweet little building. I had a bed bay put in it, and it's a sweet building where I have most of my wool is in there. I keep the yarn, and I keep various things in there. So I have a variety. I have blankets made. I'm about to make a trip up to deliver about 500 pounds of wool to have some blankets made.
Do you sell your eggs, or?
I sell eggs. Mm-hmm. I often give my eggs away. And if you all didn't have your own chickens, I was going to send you home with some because my basket is overflowing right now. Duck eggs, which for some people are great for baking.
That's what I've heard.
But also I know a couple of people who can't eat chicken eggs but can eat the duck eggs, so I keep them separate. Yes, so our website is handsandheartfarm.com. Mm-hmm. It's all one word, and handsandheart farm.com. And it's a work in progress. The technology piece is not my strong point. I'd much rather be out working with the sheep. My daughter does the website for me, and she just graduated from college, so she was doing that along with her college. So it's something we continue to work on. Yeah. But it's there. It has a lot of the products, and people can always reach out to me. Yeah. My phone number is there, my email address is there, and if somebody's looking for something in particular, they can always reach out to me, and I'm always happy to accommodate people and take pictures and to help people to get what they want. I think it's important.
I think that comes off you a lot, that's an important piece of why you do what you do, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Do you guys have any other questions for her?
No, I think my main question was on the fiber mills that you go to, how you decided which ones you wanted to bring your wool to get it processed.
Oh, it's a good question.
And how you decide how many pounds go to what.
That's a good question. And so when I got sheep, I said I was going to do every step of the process myself and decide which ones I liked the best and do those, and then send it off to somebody else to do the things I least like to do. Yeah. So the thing I like to do the least is the skirting of the fleeces, and that is laying that fleece out and taking out the waste. It may be manure tags, it may be a lot of the hay chaff. It's also the most expensive thing to have somebody else do for you. So I've had to learn how to be really good at it and really efficient. And so I've starting to like it, skirting my fleeces. And I also have a washing machine that I use for just washing wool. It's a top loader, and I like washing my own wool. And it allows me to really get my hands on it and to feel it, and to find out what's going to be the best use of that wool. Is it going to be best for blankets? Is it because it's short? It may have a break in it. That's not the kind of thing I want to use for yarn. I want to use my best quality wool for yarn. So when I'm washing it, I'm touching it and holding it many times. And then I have tried a number of different mills, and when I was in college and I wanted to knit, I've always wanted to have my yarn be affordable for people. So it needed to be affordable for me. I couldn't afford really expensive yarn when I was trying to knit, when I was living on a very little income. So I've tried to keep my prices low, and still, I mean, I sell my yarn for $20 a skein. Other stores may sell it for, the stores have to get a commission, and so it will go to a store to be sold. But I determined which mills I was going to use based on the cost.
Mm-hmm.
Cost was one thing. I tried to stay local. The wait time was a long time. It was turning into almost 2 years to get anything back. So I started shopping around, and I established a relationship. I want to establish a relationship with the person who's working with my wool and creating yarn. And so I found a mill that I can do that with, and we can experiment. And I have so much. It's like, well, what do we want to try now? So we're trying different things, and we're experimenting, and it's been about relationship again.
Mm-hmm. How many pounds of wool do you get in a year from your sheep?
Oh, that's a good question too. So I haven't done the math on that. So I get an average of 6 to 10 pounds per shearing, and I have, without the 18 lambs, I have approximately 40 sheep. About 35 to 40 sheep that I'm getting wool from. So I'd have to sit down and do that math.
You have to do like 400. If you got 10, you'd be like 400 pounds.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that you have any wool that holds over until the next year, or are you able to get it all processed?
Mostly it's the skirting that slows me down. If I were to get it all skirted and sent off, it could all be back to me within a year. Whether I could sell it all in a year, no. I think it takes a couple of years to sell as much as I have.
Yeah.
Because I have so many. You asked the question earlier about what's the ultimate number for me. And really 30 to 35 adult sheep is ideal for me.
Including rams?
No, that's really ewes.
Okay.
Just for the ewes.
And you keep some of your lambs?
I do. No more than 4.
Okay. Yeah. And do you have someone wanting to buy, do you have that all earmarked beforehand, when it's about time to deliver? Do you know?
Well, I know this year that I've got 2 people that want a small flock of sheep, and so that's what will happen. And then I've got them all halter trained, so I'll start advertising some more to try and move some of the other ones that should go to some great family that wants to have sheep.
It's an interesting thing someone told me, which I think was great advice, and it's kind of a good way to end. They said that you should always buy sheep from a farm and a farmer that you respect, the way they keep their animals.
I agree.
And I think you do a wonderful job keeping your animals. So
thank you.
So to finish, I guess I would come full circle to where we started. So Catherine, why wool? Why farming?
Oh, wool farming. This is the stuff that feeds my soul. The wool, I can have a really difficult day at work sometimes, and, a difficult day at work means that, it just was particularly challenging and something probably that I need to work on. I can come home and there's something about the wool that's really therapeutic for me, and it really does feed my soul. I like touching it. I like working with it. It's so natural, it's renewable, there's so many good qualities. I love wearing it.
And it's a gift.
It truly is a gift.
Yeah.
It is a gift. Yeah. And farming is, these are scary times with farming, in the sense that some farms are closing. And makes me even more determined to want to continue doing it. I need the work. I love the work.
I wanted to thank you very much for being here for our first podcast. We appreciate the time that you've put in, and it's a beautiful place, and thank you for all the answers to the questions.
You're welcome. Thank you for being here and for having an interest in sheep and what I do, what we all do for these animals. Thank you.
That's the hope on our podcast, is that we get a cross-section of people who farm in different ways, different sizes, different things like that, so that there isn't just one idea of, I love your idea, we've all talked about, there's the wonderful high-end yarn and things, but there's other things that people do, and we want to showcase that as well, including
Yes.
meat and goats. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we picked you first.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Learn well.
Thank you.
Took on a sheep of somebody else's that couldn't be with my herd but needed a companion. So I ended up with a very sweet, large draft horse. Was a rescue. And his name was Barney. So this we refer to as Barney's stall, because this is where Barney lived. The rams are now in there. And then we had a friend who had 2 llamas. So we had 2 llamas that were living with us for a time. So this barn worked really well for the different animals that we had. The llamas started eating the barn, so we needed to give them back to the folks. The horse was with us for about 10 years and passed away. And so now it accommodates just the sheep, you know. And this is where they come on days like this when it's really hot in the middle of the day. You want to come on in and so they're, you know, they're kind of just all drowsy right now. And
Cool.
It's where they can, yeah. So the Border Leicesters, you know, the difference between a Border Leicester and then and some of these without their wool are pretty pathetic looking, aren't they? So the Border Leicesters have the longer ears and the longer nose. There's a Romney that just stood up by the purple bucket. For you, Bob. You can't really see that, all that fluffiness.
I always feel like once they've been shorn, there's a hint of like embarrassment. So embarrassed.
Yeah, and especially these
I'm
ones.
not sure what just happened.
Exactly.
Yes.
This feels good, but I feel a little uneasy.
Yes, well, a little, yeah, naked. They're running around naked.
Right.
And
It's kind of like you find yourself outside, you've had a shower, and you're like, whoops, forgot to put clothes on.
And they, you know, these ones that were growing their wool for a year, you know, those were yearlings, and so they've had that since they were lambs.
Yeah.
So they're feeling particularly vulnerable, I think.
Yeah. Right.
We used to lamb in February, and there was one year that I didn't leave the barn for 48 hours when my family went to Florida. It was a February vacation. I thought, well, all the lambs aren't going to possibly be born during the week. Well, they left, and 2 days later, you know, the lambs started coming, and it got down, it was 15 below in the barn. So the Border Leicesters they were born, and their ears were freezing immediately. So I was dealing with frostbite on ears, and so every time I'd turn around to go into the house to get some rest or something, somebody else would go into labor. So I was out here for about 48 hours, and I finally, you know, going back and forth, quick trips to the house. But I finally called a friend, 2 Romneys, born 5 o'clock in the morning, black. They were born and their wool completely iced as soon as they were born. I went and I called a friend of my daughter's. And I said, Joji, could you come? She said, Catherine will be there in 10 minutes. I said, bring your hairdryer. And she showed up here like at 5:15 in the morning. And then she relieved me. You know, we had 2 sets of triplets in that 48 hours, and which is a little bit unheard of with a Border Leicester, and both of them were Border Leicesters that had triplets. So everything worked out fine, but it was that was the last year I ever lambed in February, and I won't do it again.